Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for August 7th, 2025. Today, I'm going to start off by passing along some information from Radio Free Mormon and encourage you to go listen to his episode entitled, Did David O. McKay Lose His Testimony? David Oman McKay was an American religious leader and educator who served as the 9th president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from 1951 until his death in 1970. RFM goes into detail about David and quite a few other prominent church members of the time. Like I said, go listen to the episode. But the crux of his argument stems from a passage in the book Writing Mormon History, written by Greg Prince, that says, I interviewed Hugh Nibley in 1995 in his office at BYU. Nibley was probably the preeminent LDS scholar apologist of the 1950s and 1960s. Popcorn is a good metaphor for the interview, for he popped from one subject to another, rarely completing one narrative before moving to the next. To get the essence of an important part of the interview, I include it verbatim. I had a talk. I don't think I should even tell you about this. I had a real argument with David O. McKay. No, I won't tell you about it because I have never told anybody about it. He then asked me to turn off the recorder, which I did, after which he related a time in the mid-1960s when, upon returning from a trip to Israel to see the Dead Sea Scrolls, he made an appointment with McKay. He was excited to tell the president that the scrolls, quote, will prove the historicity of the Book of Mormon, end quote, and shocked when McKay replied, well, we already know that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon. He blamed O.C. Tanner, a former LDS educator and very successful businessman, for polluting McKay's mind on the subject, and spent much of the rest of his career trying to reinstate the Book of Mormon as an authentic record. He then allowed me to turn on the recorder again, and a few minutes later, this time on the record, he retold the same story. At that particular time, Brother McKay was under strong pressure from O.C. Tanner, I think, who was his very dear friend. They talked down the Book of Mormon. They didn't only neglect it. Of course, that group up there, they really talked it down. Well, the main thing, as we, Tanner and Nibley, were driving back to the bus station, O.C. Tanner said to me, we've got to get rid of the Book of Mormon. That's why, he said to me, we had this meeting. It's driving the best minds out of the church. We can't have it anymore. Now you don't understand this, but me, with my training and my education, I can see all these things. And then I, Nibley, started giving him some arguments. He, Tanner, got so mad he could hardly control himself. We had a time. And I've never told anybody about that. That's the way it was. But I've always admired and loved President McKay. That's why I never told anybody about it. But he said that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon. If you've ever wondered, like I have, whether or not the top church leaders know that they are peddling a hoax, a book written by Joseph Smith, this could be a little insight into that. Now let's talk about the light in their eyes comments that Mormons make. When I was an active member, I had been taught and fully believed that worthy members had a glow about them, a light in their eyes, if you will, and that if they sinned enough or left the church, they would lose it. This was talked about often at church and in my very Mormon home. This light extended to people outside the religion too, and my mom swore that she could tell that OJ did it because he had lost the light in his eyes. This phenomenon was highlighted in a story told in the October 2005 General Conference by President James E. Faust, who was second counselor in the first presidency of the church at the time. He said, I recently recalled a historic meeting in Jerusalem about 17 years ago. It was regarding the lease for the land on which the Brigham Young University's Jerusalem Center for Near Eastern Studies was later built. Before this lease could be signed, President Ezra Taft Benson and Elder Jeffrey R. Holland, then president of Brigham Young University, agreed with the Israeli government on behalf of the church and the university not to proselyte in Israel. You might wonder why we agreed not to proselyte. We were required to do so in order to get the building permit to build that magnificent building, which stands in the historic city of Jerusalem. To our knowledge, the church and BYU have scrupulously and honorably kept that non-proselyting commitment. After the lease had been signed, one of our friends insightfully remarked, "Oh, we know that you are not going to proselyte, but what are you going to do about the light that is in their eyes?" He was referring to our students who were studying in Israel. What was that light in their eyes, which was so obvious to our friend? The Lord himself gives the answer, and the light which shineth, which giveth you light, is through him who enlighteneth your eyes, which is the same light that quickeneth your understandings. Where did that light come from? Again, the Lord gives the answer. I am the true light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. The Lord is the true light, and the Spirit enlighteneth every man through the world, that hearkeneth to the voice of the Spirit. This light shows in our countenances as well as in our eyes. The Mormon church leaders are so skilled at creating an in-group versus out-group dynamic. In that story by James Faust, the BYU students, or Mormons in general, are the in-group who have the true light, and the people who live in Israel are the out-group. James Faust suggests that even without active proselyting, the mere presence of the in-group is enough to influence the out-group. This reinforces a sense of spiritual separation and a belief that members of the church are inherently more blessed or enlightened than those outside the faith. Mormons are elite and so extra special that God has blessed them with a special eye sparkle. This is so widely believed in Mormonism that LDS Living published an article in 2021 with the headline, "Can you actually see when someone radiates the light of Christ? Here's what one scientist says." The article begins this way: "To set the stage for the present discussion, I will return to a quote from President David O. McKay. Every person is a recipient of radiation. The Savior was conscious of that. Whenever he came into the presence of an individual, he sensed that radiation, whether it was the woman of Samaria with her past life, whether it was the woman who was to be stoned or the men who were to stone her, whether it was the statesman Nicodemus or one of the lepers. He was conscious of the radiation from the individual, and to a degree so are you, and so am I. It is what we are and what we radiate that affects the people around us." And now that we know a little bit more about David O. McKay, and that he possibly did not believe in the Book of Mormon, it's fun that he's using information from the Bible here and talking about what I would call a vibe or energy that someone gives off. The article goes on to say, "There are powerful feelings of peace, reassurance, and comfort that we feel coming from certain individuals just by being near them. It could be said that some of these feelings are deduced from the words or actions of, or from previous interactions with the individual. Yet, there are times when these feelings are discerned by nothing more than a person's presence. Further, there are occasions when the lack of spiritual light from an individual is so palpable that feelings of discomfort will be generated and those around them. These feelings might alert one to escape from a potentially dangerous situation." I don't know why, but Mormonism has ruined me to the word palpable. When someone says the spirit was palpable, I don't know why it just makes me laugh. Going back to the article, there are also instances when a surge of spiritual light is detected in a very distinct and memorable fashion through spiritual sight. There are countless conversion stories that begin with a person noticing something different about the missionaries that caught their attention. These first encounters with the missionaries are often described with a phrase like, "they seemed to glow." There are also times when a member of the church is picked out from a crowd because someone could just tell they were members. I have done this before, and it's usually because I see a large family all dressed in knee-length or longer bottoms, and one of them is sporting a BYU logo, or they all get into a car with a Utah license plate. Or like happened at a library in Alaska one time, the woman bent over and I could see her garment top tucked into her garment bottom. Back to the article. When my family lived in New York, the closest temple was in New York City. My wife and I enjoyed playing a little game whenever we went to the temple together. As we walked toward the temple from an off-site parking garage, we loved to find those in the crowd who were also on their way to the Lord's house. Despite the sea of well-dressed men and women carrying small bags or briefcases on the bustling streets, it was clear who was headed to the temple and who was headed to the office. There seemed to be an unmistakable glow that caught our spiritual eyes. There have actually been attempts to scientifically study this glow coming from members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with results showing a subtle, though statistically significant, propensity for members to be correctly identified. Instead of just taking the article's word for it, I followed the footnote and went to psychologytoday.com, where it says, psychologists Nalini Ambady, then at Tufts University, and Nicholas Rule at the University of Toronto set out to test the Mormon glow. One way to do this is to see if even non-Mormons can detect it. The psychologists began their experiment by cropping headshots of Mormons and non-Mormons and asking undergraduate volunteers whether they could pick out the Mormons. They certainly could, and in just a glance. While random guessing would yield 50% accuracy, as in a coin toss, the volunteers accurately identified Mormon men and women 60% of the time. Mormons themselves were only slightly more accurate. This means that Mordor isn't foolproof, but it's statistically significant, about as accurate as the ability to tell if a face looks envious or anxious. To determine what exactly triggers Mordor, Ambady and Rule cropped photos beyond recognition. Some faces had only eyes or hair. Could judges identify Mormons from these features alone? Fail. Others had only noses or mouths. Nothing. Other faces had no features or even an outer shape. Just a patch of flesh, basically. Success. What the judges were primarily picking up, Rule explains, are cues of health in the skin. The tone and texture of facial skin reflects immune function. We have a system set up to assess others' health for mate selection and disease avoidance, Rule says. This can be co-opted for social purposes as well, such as detecting religiosity. Holy Spirit aside, their skin may glow because it's healthier. While judges likely knew that Mormons are clean living, they weren't consciously aware when categorizing faces that they were associating religious purity with good skin. It was a gut feeling. I would love to know if during the study they showed a diverse group of Mormons from all over the world or only Mormons from Utah or even the US. Now I have a question. Do you ever feel conflicted about the church? I know that it is a harmful, high-demand religion, but my partner sent me this video from TikTok a few days ago, and it's got me thinking. It's a video of, I think her name is Kiaya, Kiaya. From watching her videos, it looks like she was making some really poor decisions and ended up getting arrested. She also has a young son and is or was going through a divorce with the boy's father. Through all of this, she found the church. Not sure if she was raised a member and is going back, but now she is so happy to be what she captioned as a garment girly. I know there are quite a few people who find religion to be a powerful source of structure, community, and hope, especially when their lives are in crisis. And I love that the Mormon Church seems to be that for this person. I also wish, though, that she would have found a religion that is more transparent, inclusive, and loving. What are your thoughts? And now let's go to Instagram for this bit of information. It says the FBI and CIA heavily recruit Mormons as they are often easier to obtain security clearances for. They likely abstain from drugs and alcohol, often speak another language from their missionary trips, and typically maintain a low-risk lifestyle. I have heard this rumor before too, so I decided once I saw this fact that I would research it, and I found an article from Deseret News that says the following. While it's easy to find such rumors, it's much more difficult to substantiate them. After all, the percentage of church members working for government intelligence and security agencies has never been revealed and could never be known for certain for the simple reason that religious affiliation is not reported nor recorded by any such agency. To do so could violate the law. What's more, multiple former agents and recruiters told me that even though many members of the church may work at the CIA and FBI, that doesn't mean they were recruited because of their religious affiliations. Rather, they insist it's their personal skills, experience, and willingness to serve that makes them appealing. In all my years with the FBI, I never observed nor heard of an FBI recruiter targeting individuals, colleges, universities, or religious groups for individuals of specific religions or affiliations, explained Peter Ahern. And Rhonda Glover Reese, a 34-year veteran of the FBI, echoed Ahern's sentiments, saying she was a recruiter throughout most of her career with the Bureau and that religious affiliation is never considered and likely never even known during the recruitment process. So while Instagram is saying that is a fact, I think it is still just a rumor. And last up today, let's finish with this great quote that says, "People don't like it when you tell them something they believe isn't true or that it's propaganda. Everyone thinks they're too smart for that. But conditioning has nothing to do with intelligence. Anyone can get got, especially since it mostly happens when you're young. If you came up in the American education system, you have some fundamentally untrue beliefs that you need to unlearn over time. Otherwise, you're going to be a mark the rest of your life. Just is what it is. Don't take that personally. Doesn't mean you're dumb." And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.